South Africa 2025.
If you've just joined us this Sunday morning, a very warm welcome to the SABC News' rolling coverage of the G20 Leaders Summit from Nasrec, the Johannesburg Expo Centre, where we are in the concluding day of South Africa's two-day Leaders Summit here, and a focus on critical minerals, decent work, which I might add is a Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 8, and of course the future of artificial intelligence. They will also be discussing Thulasizwe, my colleague Thulasizwe Simelane alongside me. They will also be discussing a review of the G20 since its genesis 20 years ago. And then we will hear a closing statement from President Ramaphosa, his closing thoughts after that triumphant moment at the early stages of yesterday's opening, when he announced, or certainly sought to coalesce the leaders around a consensus declaration, which then in closed session happened behind closed doors. We got quick word that there had been consensus, some objections from Argentina, but essentially being noted by the presidency, and then, of course, endorsed by the leadership gathered here. And we understand that a lot of those leaders, now that the declaration has been adopted, are leaving early. So I think the commute to the airport might be an interesting one for those heading to OR Tambo or some of the other facilities we have in terms of exiting the country.
Yeah, we're looking at live visuals from inside the plenary. We cannot give you the audio for it. Protocol dictates that this is a closed session. But I mean, I think you don't see that this often. I don't know about you, Sherwin. In the international conferences I've attended, a closed session is a closed session.
Right, you don't even see a visual.
Don't even see the
and
visual.
This is what this host broadcaster is providing for you today. We are taking you in the room, but if you can read lips, let us know what they're saying.
Especially if you can read lips. Speaking Portuguese in the case of the Brazilian president.
I think President Lula just mentioned your name, Thulasizwe. From what I'm seeing, there it is again, Thulasizwe
Simelane.
Simelane.
Many of these conferences, you don't get to see the visuals inside. And there goes your starship there again.
Right, the protea above the leaders. Of course, the protea, as the national symbol, the national flower of South Africa. This is, of course, a South African event, Africa's first G20. And of course, we continue our conversation with Dr. Mzwanele Mchwanti, a G20 senior researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. We had some audio problems with him, but I'm going to allow Thulasizwe to re-ask his question so that if you've just joined us, you might be part of that conversation as well.
So, Dr. Mchwanti, we were talking about the point, part of what will be received in that session that we are watching will be a report on the G20 at 20, and we had set the scene by reflecting some of the comments, including the comments of the United States that say, when we take over the presidency of the G20, we look forward to refocusing it to what the G20 was meant to do. But that was 20 years ago, way before its evolution to the point of having a leaders summit at heads of state and government level. There were factors that necessitated that evolution to where we are today. So you were giving us your take. Has the G20 been better for it, this widened mandate that looks at other issues that are not necessarily hardcore economics of the globe, but fuse in developmental issues? A few minutes ago, we were talking about gender and gender equality, all of that in the basket of issues now.
Thank you so much, Thulasizwe. I think this is quite a very important element. Obviously, the G20, the discussions ensued after the Asian crisis, and then we saw the G20 forum really being born out of the 2008 financial crisis. But we also have seen the successes of the G20 during the COVID-19 pandemic, and now as we're confronted with the issues of debt, which then means, for instance, the simple example during the COVID-19 pandemic and suspending debt payments for low-income countries, developing the common framework to deal with those issues, is an indication that you could be faced with a health challenge that has economic implications. Similarly to climate change, similarly to disasters.
Slow down. I like the point you're making. COVID was not, strictly speaking, an economic issue.
Yes. And it had economic, it was purely a health pandemic. It was a pandemic, but it had economic implications. And this group of countries was able to quickly come together and resolve issues of trade, issues of payments, issues of technology transfer, issues of vaccines. And they were able to respond quicker than they would not have.
Because that resets the global economy and gets us to reopen.
Yes, definitely. If there's a huge disaster, like Canada has been having wildfires, Spain this year, the US itself has been having such disasters. You are able to respond quickly in this forum. That's why the forum even got elevated to a leader's level, because you needed that political agency when you are confronted with global challenges. So the reviewing of the G20, and so to say that the mandate has been expanded, I think that's a misjudgment of what this forum has been able to deliver, purely because it's been elevated to a political level where you need the leaders to urgently act on matters. Because, for instance, you've been having the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, and other bodies like WTO, etc. That would take long to respond to these issues, whether it's debt. I mean, for instance, we're talking about the common framework now, which came in after the COVID-19 pandemic.
By the way, that's being reaffirmed in the current declaration.
And we can reaffirm it, but it has been very slow in dealing with the issues. So you can imagine if the leaders had left the issues of debt sustainability to the global financial institutions, that the movement and the relief and the reforms of the urgently required global international financial architecture would not happen, But you get a situation where the leaders here of these big economies are able to elevate the issues and able to tell their ministers that you've got to, this year, for instance, for the very first time, historical, under this presidency, we had the Debt Sustainability Declaration of the Ministers to acknowledge the challenges that African countries and low-income countries are facing with the debt burdens. You wouldn't get that if you didn't have, and so to speak, the importance of this, linking it to the Africa Expert Panel report that was chaired by Trevor Manuel, is that it linked this issue of debt directly to the issue of development, to say that there has been a trade-off for many countries, particularly in Africa, where they have to give up or default on development because they are servicing debt, up to 60% of their revenue sometimes. So there's no country, therefore, that can develop in that sense. But because of a forum like this, you've been able to push the ministers of finance and the central bank governors and the World Bank and the IMF and say, agree to resolve this issue of debt as a developmental crisis, not because you have to favor creditors or you have to respond to creditors and making sure that countries are able to pay off their debt, but because you have to look at what is happening to health, education, infrastructure spending.
Sorry, Shawan, I'll let you come in a
Don't
moment.
Don't apologize, please. Continue to dominate.
I know you're itching. I know you're itching to come in. But is this born out of the reality that we've tried the alternative view? The view that says strict economics, these leaders, especially what is now the finance track, the finance ministers and governors of central banks would meet, and that deliberations inform what the IMF does, what the WTO does, strict economics, we're focused. That's the alternative. Is this born out of that, to say we've done the alternative, responding to the Asian crisis, the Mexican crisis? Then when the crisis hit economies that we never thought would be hit by crisis that has contagion effect, the United States, that's when we decided that let's try something else that's different. Is this expansion born out of that?
Certainly. I mean, also another important thing, I think you were speaking about it, the inequality report. Again, Prof. Gosh, what they're centering is to say, we have tried. For instance, the US priorities in announcing them, they say deregulation and market-led economy is going to be one of their priorities. We've been there since 1980. And the inequality, which that report is trying to indicate, has skyrocketed. And this is not just economic inequality. It's also social inequality. It's also climate-related inequality. It's also, so inequalities in all their dimensions have been elevated since we've pursued the market-led economy. So that report is trying to say we have not been successful at this, and the inequalities have increased as a result of the approach that we've taken. So we have to then go back and center how we make sure that we utilize public funds, the resources that governments mobilize to elevate poverty, increase development
Right.
and decrease inequalities in all their dimensions. So not just the fact that the top 1% has in the last 20 years managed to take over the 90% of the incomes.
Can I go? Dr. Ntwanti, we're going to come back to you.